So I'm excited to be able to start our Speed of Trust podcast with MASSP's Deputy Executive Director, Colin Rittmaster. So, Colin, before we get going into talking about the book study, let's just do a review of your career. I know we have a number of new members that may not have known you for as long as I have. So, let's just talk about Colin's work history. Where did you go to college? And then where did you teach, assistant principal, principal, everything you did before MASSP?
Yeah, so I'm a proud graduate of Hope College and had a great experience there and really wasn't going into education to begin with. But as I engaged with the faculty and staff there, I really came to love the opportunity to pay forward things that I had the benefit of as a product of special education. And so I went to Hope College, specialized in elementary education and special education with an emphasis in learning disabilities and then was fortunate to be hired right away out of college at West Ottawa Public Schools, first as an elementary teacher. Then I went to the middle level as an assistant principal, thinking I'd gain some experience and go back to elementary, but I fell in love with the secondary activities, looped with a group of students from middle school into ninth grade, and loved the high school experience. And so from there, I became a high school principal in Matawan, Michigan, just outside of Kalamazoo, where I spent over 10 years as the high school principal there before coming to MASSP to join you and really working to advance learning and to pay forward things that each of us have benefited from our time on the board together to supporting principals and other educators and their work.
So I know you've got a wonderful family. Tell us a little bit about them.
Yeah, so I'm the proud husband of Elise Rittmaster, who works in a nonprofit land as well, working with um, providing opportunities for students who are on the autism spectrum for adults and being able to work at a ranch, helping them to engage. And then she also works as a at a nonprofit advocacy coalition, providing building space to people who may not otherwise be able to use or to afford um, a place to run a business. And so it's an old church they converted. In addition to that, I have two sons that are in a landscape and lawn care business, so they keep us busy, but our yard beautiful.
Fantastic. So, we're going to jump right into this podcast. I'm really excited to be able to bring this to our members, just a different and new opportunity. We want people to be able to access The Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey, and they can either access this just reading the book themselves for their own enrichment and growth. Or if they need sketch credits for it, for continuing education and to be able to renew their certificates, they could also take the DLN course that goes along with it, and then they would be able to earn those sketch credits. So there's two opportunities here. And the great news is that both of these are both kind of, at your own pace. So if somebody wants to read through the book quickly and listen to the podcast as they go through the book, just to kind of almost have like a book buddy that's accessible when they have convenient time, or they can once again go through the DLN course, and the podcast will take them through that module that's going to be online. So this just is something that MASSP is trying. We know that book studies are challenging for people when we do them at a set time, like 9 a.m. Once a month or what have you. So we thought this might be just another opportunity. Why do you think this book will resonate with building administrators?
I think we can agree that trust is the foundation of every effective school. Stephen Covey calls it out the one thing that changes everything. I think administrators feel that reality every single day, whether it's leading staff through change, creating a safe environment for students, responding to family needs. Nothing works without trust. And administrators, we know, particularly since the pandemic, are under constant pressure to move fast and do more with less. And this book is a powerful reminder that high trust isn't a luxury. It's the speed multiplier that makes all the other work possible. I also think this book resonates because Covey doesn't just leave trust as this abstract concept or this idea. He makes it tangibles with metaphors and stories which speak to me. It allows me to envision what this looks like. One of my favorites is his use of the tree. He uses this metaphor around the trunk and branches above ground representing the results, the visible outcomes of our leadership. But he also recognizes that the health of the tree comes from the unseen roots. Trust functions that same way. He talks about how it's often the invisible that's underground that's taking place that happens that allows what's above the surface. And so when the roots are deep, the tree can withstand storms. When the roots are shallow, the whole system is fragile. And I think we see that in schools as the politicization of education has really come to the forefront. And that's a picture every administrator can understand because so much of our work is about tending to what isn't visible, whether it's the culture, the relationships, the consistency that makes results possible. Um, so I think as he shares these stories about his father's teaching, even like to me with my sons in their lawn care business, he talked about that story about the green and the clean. And his dad thought he was teaching about responsibility, just like my dad instilled in me. But what Stephen actually internalized was something deeper, that his father trusted him. And that real takeaway for us as leaders, when we extend trust, we're not just teaching skills or checking off tasks, we're building character and confidence in the people we serve. And I believe as administrators, we live in that daily tension. Do we micromanage or do we empower? Do we hold on tight because we're afraid of losing control or something might go wrong? Or do we extend trust and let people grow? And Covey really provides us a path forward to empowerment that's built on trust so that we don't feel like that risk is something that's going to come back to bite us later. That really, if we want real growth and ownership to happen amongst our staff, we need to empower them, we need to trust them so that growth is possible. So I just believe the book will connect so deeply with administrators because it names what we already sense, something we already feel. And that is trust is both the hidden root system and the visible fruits of leadership. And when we get trust right, everything else becomes possible.
Well, I think it's pretty hard to read this book and separate, completely personal and business because, so many of these things as we're reading it, we start thinking about different relationships we have and how some relationships seem to work so easily and others don't. And when you really reflect on that, I think it really shows where the level of trust is. And in those relationships that are challenging and take so much time, there's probably a trust issue that's probably underlying that. And that was something that I think really came to mind for me as I was reading this book. So over the course of the 24-25 school year, you wrote a great series of articles that really seem to resonate with our members. Do you see connections between speed of trust and those articles?
Yeah, thank you. When I was writing those leadership and motion articles, it was often based on conversations I had with members who are navigating the challenges of this modern school leadership. You talked about that piece around separating who we are. And I think sometimes when we lose our way, it's because we forgot our why. And these articles really gave me a place to go back and ground myself in the work of being a building principal. And in each article, I was really aiming to provide both inspiration and practical strategies, just like Stephen Covey does in this book, to help leaders shift from firefighting to fire prevention, managing time more effectively, aligning actions with their goals, and cultivating inclusive, positive sum school cultures. Through these insights and trying to provide real world examples and actionable steps, my intent really was to challenge school leaders to lead with purpose, foster meaningful connections, and create environments where both staff and students thrive. So those same themes really echoed throughout the Speed of Trust book. Covey really pushed us to think about specific behaviors like delivering on results, confronting reality, and clarifying expectations that line up directly with what I was writing about. And one of the clearest examples I was thinking back to was where we talked about trust fuels agility. In that piece, I argued that agility doesn't come from processes and structures alone, it comes from the confidence in each other. You can't have a team move quickly, take risks, or innovate if they don't trust the people beside them. I saw that as a player on a football team in high school and college. I saw it as a wrestler, even though it was an independent sport or independent athlete. We, as a team, came together around those desired results. And that's essentially what Covey points out that trust accelerates everything. He even put it to a formula. When trust goes up, he talks about speed increases and costs decrease. When trust goes down, speed slows and costs rise. Administrators feel that every day, right? A high trust staff can adapt quickly to changes, rally around students, and solve problems with creativity, while a low trust staff gets bogged down in suspicion, second guessing, and miscommunication. Just everything takes longer and costs more in time, energy, and resources. So I believe as administrators that it's more than a clever equation, it's really a lived reality. If trust is high in schools, you can move quickly with fewer obstacles. Initiatives roll out more smoothly, collaboration flows more naturally, and people assume the best in each other. But as you know, when trust is low, every step feels like pushing uphill. Decisions get second guessed, resistance builds, the cost of everything, not just in dollars, but in our time and energy and really the morale. It just goes up dramatically. That's a lesson when leaders can't afford to ignore, right? Trust isn't a soft skill in and of itself, it's the determining factor in how effectively we lead. You also see that in this summer's Lions reflections, right? I was trying to revisit that piece, and Detroit suddenly didn't just become relevant just because they upgraded talent. They became relevant because their culture shift. Dan Campbell, one of my favorites, built trust by being authentic, by saying what he meant and following through with actions. The result was a ripple effect, right? Players bought in, fans believed, and the whole organization moved faster and stronger together, and the city of Detroit just became alive. That's exactly the arc Covey describes, right? When we trust grows, speed increases and costs decrease. In my most recent back to school piece, I actually focused on what happens after the bell stops, and the bell stops ringing, the preseason's over and the real work begins. That's where Covey's framework shows up in vivid colors. We saw that when Detroit lost to the Green Bay Packers with false starts and delay of games and just other penalties, yet how they recovered in just 1 week and coming back stronger than ever. You see, culture is built in those and the pep talks and inspirational speeches, those are good. But in September and October, when we're really going down those hallways and they're crowded and the issues are messy and the pressure is real, does that culture sustain? The question isn't what did you say you valued in the opening staff meetings as much as what are you doing now during the grind of the year? That's the moment where I think leaders really make their deposits into the trust account or withdrawals they can't afford. In many ways, I would say my articles were really circling around what Covey names outright. Trust is not a side issue. It is the issue that either multiplies our efforts or taxes them. When I go back and read my articles in preparation for this, I thought about them from the lens of the speed of trust. And I can see that why they might have resonated with people because it just speaks the truth around rooting this in trust, that trust is the currency of leadership, whether on the football field, in the classroom, or in our offices.
Yeah, or in our homes. I mean, for that matter. And I think that's another, thing that's so great about this book is, to me, reading this now, at the start of the school year is such a great opportunity to kind of, get that fresh start and really be thinking about, with intentionality, how important building trust is. And the thing I really like is that if you're in a building that has low trust, that has, some culture issues, this book really does give you a lot of, tips and ways that you can improve that. So it's not like, oh, if you've lost trust or you've had issues, you better just leave and find a new job. It's you can fix it, and you can be intentional about making those investments. So I think it's a great opportunity for many people as well.
I think that's a really
Um,
important piece. If I can just, he talks about that trust isn't just sustainable and renewable, it's repairable, right?
mhm.
Like when we betray our trust, whether good intentions or not, we can repair that just by going back and recognizing, acknowledging it, and trying to repair that harm. I think that's an important piece as administrators that it's okay to acknowledge and accept the mistakes we made. In fact, it's part of taking ownership of that is so important to our leadership, that humility and grace that can be modeled for others to take risks and to own mistakes they had, as well as celebrating the successes.
So true. Yeah. So if you were to pick one section of the book that really captured your attention, what would that be?
Well, you know me, I'm not very good at just one thing. So
It is a
the
challenge.
hard part.
I know for sure.
So that was tough for me. So I'm actually picked two. So
Okay,
the
that
two
we
that
can
really
live with
spoke to
too.
me had to do with the first wave of self-trust. And he talks about core two being intent. So when you open up in the book to page 75, that section really stopped me in my tracks, specifically when the acknowledgement that we judge ourselves by our intentions and others judge us by our behaviors.
Mhm.
That spoke loudest to me because in education, it's so easy to fall into what I call being an educational hypocrite, right? We'd say we believe all students can learn, but then we accept achievement gaps to persist. We say we value strong planning and preparation, but then we show up to staff meetings without a plan. We expect teachers to design thoughtful lessons, but we don't give the same care to professional learning. We talk about meaningful feedback, but too often we fall back into cheerleading instead of targeted, actionable coaching. Our intentions may be good, but people don't see the intent, they see our behaviors. If I wanted teachers to model best practices for students, then I have to model it for myself, right? And for our staff. If I want to hold students accountable with care, then I have to hold myself accountable with clarity and respect. Otherwise, I'm not living out that value that I say I stand for. The other area that really spoke to me had to do with capabilities. And as we've been thinking about innovation, that section where it talks about are you relevant really spoke loud to me. And in there, the line that struck me most was if you're not learning, you're becoming irrelevant. That truth keeps echoing in my head because it connects directly to that work we've talked about with innovation that we've been enmeshed with at MASSP, whether it's Michael Horn's From Reopen to Reinvent that challenges us to stop tinkering on the edges and redesign schools for true relevance, or Ted Dintersmith's documentary, What Schools Could Be, that highlights schools that dared to step out of a traditional mold and create learning experience that actually had relevance beyond success in school and mattered to kids, or even Will Richardson's work around his our confronting our unpleasant truth, his manifesto, or what I really like are the 12 big questions that really press us to wrestle with deeper why of school. What is sacred at our school? What is learning? What do we value? What do we measure? And what are we really preparing kids for? We saw those same themes play out at EdCon this last summer, where the energy wasn't about getting back to normal, but about asking, how do we build what's next? And even now, with our Innovative Leaders Network, that's been the heartbeat of some of this work that you had launched last year that talked about relevance isn't optional. Leaders who stop learning stop leading, right? So we talk about what's our plus one this year. So as staff and students lose trust in us, if we're not modeling curiosity, adaptability, and reinvention ourselves. So I think that's really comes back to us and our willingness to keep learning. When leaders are willing to learn, to experiment, to take risks and admit when something doesn't work, we're not just protecting our credibility, we're multiplying trust across the whole community. That's what I took from those two sections. Intent without consistent behavior undermines trust, and leadership without continual learning risks irrelevance. If trust is the root system, then credibility is the soil it grows in. And credibility only happens when people see us learning, adapting, and aligning our behaviors with the values we claim to hold.
I think that during the pandemic, was the first time where administrators were asking teachers to do something that they themselves hadn't done before. They were asking people to teach in an online, format that they themselves hadn't done. And it's hard to maybe keep your relevance and, set an expectation if you yourself haven't walked in those same shoes, right? And so I feel like we're really in that time again where we're really going to be transforming learning over the next 5 years, like incredibly. And if we don't learn alongside our teachers and learn alongside our students in this new, opportunity that AI presents, you are going to quickly become irrelevant. And I say in every meeting that I can around administrators that this isn't something you want to abdicate to the technology director or to the curriculum director or to somebody at the ISD. And that's not to say that those people aren't amazing thought partners. They're great thought partners, but you can't just say, someone else can make that decision. Like, why are you the principal if you're not going to lead learning? And you've got to be able to experience creating a lesson in an AI environment, delivering a lesson in an AI environment, watching how students react and interact to it, to be able to maintain your relevance. And I have been a little surprised that more people haven't grabbed the rope that we've been throwing out for the last 2 years on this. I don't know, has that surprised you at all?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that in order to lead learning, we have to have a culture that supports learning. And I think sometimes we forget that as leaders of learning, we also have to be the lead learner. And one of the things I've been asking people recently as they've shared some struggles with staff or with parents and stuff is when you think about your identity within your school, what comes to mind? And what I think we lose sight of the further we are from the classroom is our identities as learners. And you brought that out. Like, if we're the lead learner, the lead doing, like, we have to be willing to take risks. We have to see ourselves as not having all the answers in doing that. But that can be uncomfortable. Like, for whatever reason, culture, we think as we take the next progression in this career ladder, that we have to be that much more competent and we can't make mistakes. And I think competence comes from taking calculated risks, but we fail forward. And part of it is how do we create a culture where failure isn't a reason to be fired, but an opportunity to grow? So whether it's our mentor coaching things like within our strengthening leaders, where it creates a safe space to bring people along, or with our teachers, like rather than being punitive around failure, giving zeros or no credit, how do we actually just use that as an opportunity to learn? How do we make learning the constant while time and intervention are the variable? Like we talk about this, but do we embrace it? Do we adjust the bell schedules based on the learning needs of our students? Do we ensure everybody's having the same PD at the same time, the same way, or do we differentiate PD for our staff? And I think we have to get outside of this set frame of how PD works or how lessons work and really think about how do we personalize learning more. And I think the place to start is with ourselves, right? When we look in the mirror, do we see ourselves as a learner? Do we seek out with curiosity the opportunity for new ideas? Or are we being more fundamentalist in protecting in rigid ways the past practices? So I just think going back to what I said earlier around we can't be educational hypocrites. We can't expect others to adjust their practice without looking at ourselves and saying, how are we adapting? How are we iterating to better serve our students and our staff? When you think about that in this whole speed of trust, is there a part of the book that speaks to you related to that?
Well, I think obviously like you, I found it hard to kind of just zero in on one thing. But on pages 134 and 135, they talk a little bit about, for the most part, the difference between those who change behavior and those who don't is a compelling sense of purpose. And this goes back to what you spoke to at the beginning about people losing their way and losing their why. And if you truly like read this book, take it to heart and say, geez, I could be doing things better, you can change your behavior. And that's what, Covey tries to rally people around, right? It's not saying, oh geez, like I've gotten this situation and I'm never going to be able to dig my way out. He says actually it's pretty easy to dig your way out and here's how I'm going to help you do that. But you've got to stick to it and you've got to continue on and be very mindful and intentional about rebuilding that trust. So I thought that was kind of just, continually the compelling piece around this. So when we start thinking about this, building administrators are, of course, people first. When you read this book, did you find yourself thinking about things from both a personal family perspective and association leadership work? Have you shared anything that you've read in this book with your family or with our staff at MASSP?
Yeah. ironically, when you brought this up and you said, "Hey, I was gonna looking at this new idea for a book study through a podcast series, a little more asynchronous." I picked back up the book as although I had received it several years ago, I had never really dug back into it. And so this summer, sitting with my family at the beach at our family cottage, I picked up the book and started reading it. And it just really did speak to me. And I want to tie that together with that passage you talked about purpose. And maybe I can thread that needle a little bit. You know, on a professional side, the Speed of Trust spoke directly to who I am and who I strive to be as a leader. When I think about my identity, my values, my broader purpose as an educator, a husband, father, son, and uncle, they're all tied to showing up with consistency, transparency, and alignment between what I say and what I do. I'm very results oriented. So when staff and our MASSP members interact with me, I want them to know that my intent and my behaviors align, that I will follow through on commitments. If you ask me to do something, I'm going to deliver results. I may have some obstacles along the way. I may not hit the exact success criteria, but I'm going to give it my best effort. And with feedback, I will iterate and adjust. And that I'm going to make decisions through the lens of what's best for our members and their students. How do we advance learning through that leadership? It's not just a mission statement, it's a way of approaching the work. And that's how I want to show up in every space as someone trustworthy because my words and my actions line up. And part of that's about clarity. I've often said no one rises to low expectations, right? And just as importantly, expectations should never be a mystery. Covey's framework reminded me that trust really grows when people know exactly what's expected of them and can see me holding myself to the same standard. Clarity isn't just an organizational tool. It's really about what Covey talks about is making deposits in that trust bank account. So as I go back to that personal piece and reading on the beach, that personal lens, what really hit me was kind of a smack in the face was that trust is built in drops and lost in buckets. It
Mhm.
really stopped me because I think about how easily we can give our best energy to our work and leave our family with what's left. As leaders, it's tempting to pour ourselves entirely into school, our district, in our case, our association responsibilities, only to come home with an empty tank. And that's just not sustainable. And more importantly, it risks making withdrawals in the relationships that matter most with the people who we love and will be with even after we leave a certain position. This book really pushed me to think not only about how I build trust with our staff and colleagues, but also how I built trust with my wife and my sons. And I'm making the same kind of deposits at home as I do at work. And the real answer was no. And so one of the things I really started thinking about is, am I present? What am I doing today to be present for my sons, for my wife, for the rest of our family? Am I reliable? Do I show up and honor my commitments to the family? Am I intentional with the people who love me most? Do I put on my principal hat or my teacher hat, or am I the father and husband at home? It's easy to be consumed by day-to-day demands of leadership, but if I don't keep fueling the tank back at home, I'm not living my values fully. So for me, this dual lens is the real power of the book. It calls me to be the kind of leader our staff and members need and can count on, but also the kind of husband and father my family deserves. And
Oh,
what
for
this hope
sure.
is that lesson is the same, right? Trust is
Yeah.
the foundation and it's built one small choice at a time, making sure we're putting drops in those buckets and not emptying them at work.
So true. So every school community building has their strengths and challenges when it comes to trust. And Covey reminds us it often takes many trust deposits, and that one singular withdrawal can deplete the bank. Why is it important for leaders to be situationally aware of both deposits and withdrawals?
Yeah, that metaphor of the trust account is simple, but super powerful, right? Leaders are constantly making deposits. We're listening, we're following through on commitments, we're showing respect, we're extending responsibility, but we're always at risk of withdrawals. And the truth is, one withdrawal can outweigh dozens of deposits. If I cancel a meeting at the last minute, show up late, or fail to follow through on a promise, what does that communicate to those whom I'm entrusted? Those withdrawals are typically bigger than I typically would have thought. And Covey really made that point to me about what we do reflects our values. Is my behavior reflecting what I value? People versus things. And that's why I think it's situational awareness matters so much, right? When I was a teacher, we talked about that with itness, the eyes in the back of our heads, right? Do we see what's going on in the classroom? And I think sometimes we get so caught up in the technical, we lose that situational awareness because we're so focused on doing that we forget who we're doing it for. So I think as leaders, we have to pause, we have to step back, we have to course correct more frequently because those small missteps become major erosion of trust. And really, Covey's image of the trust bank also explains what many administrators feel when they step into a new role, right? Like you take on a new position, and we don't realize when we're taking on that opportunity that we're also inheriting what he calls a trust tax, something my mentor called the inheritance tax, right? We inherit the cultures, the practices, the legacies of our predecessors, and sometimes we inherit skepticism too, whether it's staff and families who don't yet know our true intentions and questioning whether our actions, our behaviors, and our intent match up. Those things hold us back. They're waiting to see if our words align with our reality. And that means our first responsibility isn't about, when we're thinking about this 100-day plan, this 50-day plan, this 30-day plan, I think our first responsibility is to declare our intent and to demonstrate that intent in each and every interaction. That's why it's not enough just to show up to work. It's showing up with the right intentions and demonstrating the right behaviors that align with our values and beliefs, knowing that every action is either a deposit or a withdrawal. So when he talks about are we a walking dividend or are we a walking tax, that really struck me, right? Leaders who model their values, even in small ways, create dividends that compound over time. And that's really, I think, what he talks about is the dividing line. Leaders who don't walk the talk, where intent and behavior is misaligned, become walking taxes on trust, draining energy, slowing momentum, and really raising the cost of every interaction. But we also know, and he speaks to leaders who consistently model their values that turn deposits into dividends. And those dividends compound over time. You talked about it's not just small steps, but that exponential growth. And people assume the best of us instead of the worst. They move faster because they don't waste energy second guessing our motives or wondering what we think. They lean into change because they trust us to drive forward with them, not to them. And that's the lesson for administrators, right? Every choice, every word, every behavior is either a deposit or a withdrawal. And the difference between a walking tax and a compounding dividend comes down to whether we live the values we say and we believe in, or whether or not we're expecting others to do things we don't expect of ourselves.
Whew, no pressure there, Colin. So we often have the best of intentions. We start a new school year, we, get everybody fired up, we, set these great grandiose plans. And when you read a book like this, I think you can kind of get that same, initial rush. And you feel inspired to work on trust building. But then the school year gets underway and the push and pull priorities and responsibilities sets in, and naturally people pull away from some of those really good intentions that maybe they started at the beginning of the school year. So how do you suggest people stay focused on some key takeaways from Speed of Trust, and how can they self-monitor progress or maybe even self-monitor regression so that they can correct?
Right. That's the hardest part, I think, right? Like you can be reading a book and be inspired. You can attend a workshop or a conference and leave with all these aspirational goals. And then all of a sudden we get back to the day-to-day reality with emails piling up, the calendar's full, and suddenly trust building behavior just slipped to the margins, right? So for me, it goes back to something that I firmly believe. We tend to overestimate what we can do in one day and underestimate what we can do in three. As a principal, I overestimated what I could do in one school year. and underestimated what we can do in 3 years. So I just think it comes down to identifying what's one, two, or three key behaviors that we could anchor on and then build routines around. For example, if my focus on having clear expectations, I can make it a habit to start every meeting with clarity around purpose and outcomes. If I want to strengthen my listening, I can be disciplined not to listen to respond or to problem solve, but to listen to understand, to help the speaker develop, test, and refine their thinking. Right? Those small, consistent habits keep building trust from being an abstract concept to more visible, repeatable, and durable, even when the year gets busy. One of my favorite authors that um, I think is important is John Maxwell, who talks about the laws of priorities. And as a staff, we've talked about the 3 R's from that area. He provides a powerful framework. He says leaders must focus on three questions. What is required of me? What gives the greatest return on investment? And what brings the greatest reward? And John talks about when we can triangulate those answers to those three things, that's where we're thriving. And if we don't discipline ourselves to prioritize in this way, the urgent will always crowd out the important. Trust building, when you think about it, falls into all three of those categories, right? It's required of us as leaders. It yields the highest return because culture and performance both depend on it. And it brings the greatest reward because we came into education because we wanted to build those relationships. We wanted to authentically collaborate. We wanted to build a community of learners where people feel safe to do their best work, where they felt valued, they felt engaged, they felt successful. This past year, I've seen this play out, not just in our leadership journey, but in my own personal journey with weight loss and fitness. Early on, I learned the hard way that motivation alone won't carry you, right? How many times did we start a diet? Did we start exercise or another New Year's resolution, right? Motivation can get you started, but it's the discipline that keeps you going. Motivation got me up in the morning for a couple days, but discipline, day in and day out, without exception, became the routine that reshaped my health. The, the same is true with trust. Motivation might inspire us as we're reading this book or attending that conference, but discipline, the daily deposits, the intentional choices, the routines we stick to, is really what sustains trust when the year gets hard. That's why I think self monitoring is so important. Reflection helps, but outside perspective is even more powerful. I am fortunate at MASSP to have people like you, who is a trusted colleague, that I can ask a question. Am I following through the way I intend to? Am I living up to the expectations? Am I being an educational hypocrite, right? Do you see my actions lining up with what we're doing? And I just think that if we're not asking those questions about the people we work with, we're not being accountable for that. And so really it's around trust is too important to leave to guesswork, right? We need feedback. Just like teachers need it in the classroom, students need it as learners. We need it as learners too. And so I wrote in my back to school article this year about staying focused after the preseason prep talk, when the real test comes up in October and November. And we talked about culture and commitment. So once that bell is ringing, when the hallways are full and the challenges are real, that's when those fundamentals matter, right? Just like in sports, the habits build and practice determine how we perform in the season. Trust isn't a one-time resolution, right? It's a daily discipline. And I'm fortunate at MASSP to have a leader like you, colleagues in the office who help me stay committed to that discipline, even when the year gets busy, when I'm still buried in my head in the computer or in this workshop, that I can still see beyond the end of my nose and remember why we're here. I think that's really what separates leaders who inspire and those who try to just direct. How do we separate the inspiration from the noise, and staying true to our values?
Well, I think you really kicked off that answer so well with giving that perspective of setting up some routines in the areas that you're really focused on. And once you set those routines up, they become habit. And, that's the way to change behavior is changing your habits, right? So I think that was a really, really good advice. So, as we kind of wrap things up today and get ready to launch this podcast and book talk, for assistant principals and principals who may not have or weren't going to read The Speed of Trust, give us a great sales pitch of why you think they should.
This isn't just another leadership book filled with theories. It's practical, it's direct, and it's deeply human. Covey doesn't just tell us that trust matters, he shows us how to build it, measure it, and repair it. And in schools where everything depends on relationship, trust isn't just a nice idea, it's the currency of leadership. If you're on the fence, think of it this way: trust is a leadership multiplier. It lowers the cost of every interaction and increases the speed of every initiative. When trust is high, schools can adapt, collaborate, and innovate quickly. When trust is low, everything slows down: communication, collaboration, and progress, while the cost of energy, time, and morale rise dramatically. I'd say Covey doesn't just inspire us to value trust, he gives us the language, the tools, and the behaviors to actually build it. For administrators where relationships with families, students, and staff shape everything, this isn't optional. And here's the key: it starts with us. Before we can expect others to trust, we have to trust ourselves. We have to examine our own intent, our own consistencies, and our own credibility. If we model this behavior of trust, others will follow. If we don't, no system or initiative will make it work. That's why I believe the speed of trust should be the top of your list. If you want to move from managing to leading, from compliance to culture, this book provides a roadmap. It's practical, it's memorable, it's life giving for schools and for me personally. This book will not only change how you lead, it will change how you live your life.
Well, thanks, Colin. I appreciate you taking the time to kick this podcast off with me. And we will be hopefully recording again with each other. I'd love to do the last section of the book with you, just to be able to kind of, bring this full circle and to be able to get your perspectives again in our conclusion. So thanks again. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me about this today.
Thank you for the opportunity to join you.